Hello, everybody. My name is Magda. I am the head of growth at Email Industries, and I am here with Al Iverson and LB Blair. And we're going to be talking about a pretty important topic, I would say, because in the first quarter of 2024, which is in a moment, Yahoo and Gmail will start enforcing new requirements for bulk senders to authenticate their emails, to enable easy unsubscription and ensure that they send only wanted emails. So now DMARC, which is part of the authentication, can already seem like a big and scary thing. Like, what does it do? What's it for? Like, do I even need this? What happens if I don't set it up, or what if I set it up the wrong way? Rest assured, we're going to help you right now during this hour. So we'll make sure that you are completely ready to implement all the necessities and to go ahead and be ready for the new Gmail and Yahoo requirements. And we'll be discussing this, like I said, with Al and LB. Al has worked in the deliverability technology and consulting for more than 20 years, consulting with clients to minimize and mitigate deliverability issues and building tools and features to help improve inbox placement success inside and outside of various email platforms. He covers deliverability tips and tricks. I encourage everybody to follow both Al and LB on LinkedIn, as they share some pretty good tips on email. And LB is the head of deliverability here at Email Industries. She has so much experience working with numerous Fortune 100 brands. Some were sending over 1 billion emails monthly. LB strives to deeply understand clients' businesses, their use cases for email, and their pain points, then focuses on engineering email infrastructure and strategies for optimal inbox placement. So I'm going to disappear now, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Magda.
Bye-bye, Magda. Yeah, bye-bye, magical Magda. She shows up, she makes the webinar happen, and then, like the fairy godmother of email webinars, she disappears. So that's fantastic. Al, how the heck are you, man? How's the new year?
I'm doing well, LB. The new year is treating me well. I started a new job, and my new role is director of deliverability for Aweber. So I'm very happy to be working with Tom Kulzer and the wonderful folks there. But you'll still see me out and about on Spam Resource and other places doing wacky deliverability stuff. How about you, LB? How's life treating you?
Good. Lots going on, but all of it's good. Really super excited for Inbox Expo coming to Atlanta. Atlanta is absolutely an email town with so many greats here, like, you know, the product formerly known as Silverpop, MailChimp. We've got goodness, Click Dimensions, my old employer. There's so many email companies here in Atlanta, and it just seemed a shame that there wasn't a regular Atlanta conference. So Scott and I said we're going to make it happen. And also, for anybody tuning in, maybe overseas, I am going to be at the Deliverability Summit in Amsterdam, doing a follow-up on the 11th and 12th on this particular presentation. We're going to look at some of the data and see how things actually shake out. Because there's kind of what Google says they're going to do, and then it's going to be really interesting to see how it actually shakes out and what traffic and when it starts actually getting blocked. So I think that's going to be super interesting.
Absolutely. So here's what we're going to talk through today. I'm not going to read the slide to you because we're going to talk through every one of these points, starting with, you know, the whole Yahoo thing and what's actually going on there. We'll take you through that, the email authentication basics, how to set up DKIM correctly, how to test it all. We're going to talk about what does a DMARC report look like, what is DMARC and why should you care about it, what are your options for reporting, tools, services, and gotchas and frequently asked questions, things to worry about to make sure you don't implement DMARC in a way that could come back and bite you in the rear end later. And we'll have time for your questions too. So please load up questions in the chat or the Q&A. And if we have time, and we hope we will definitely answer as many of those as we can. LB?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Please, if you have questions other than just, if you have questions, please put that in the Q&A specific versus the webinar chat, just so it's going to stand out like a little bit more. And some of them, if they're really like niche, we might just answer them via text during the webinar instead of covering out loud, because there's always a little something going on. Well, awesome. So grateful to have everybody here today. This is excellent. So yeah, Al, go ahead and I would say take it away.
All right, so here's what the whole thing we're talking about here today, right, is make sure that senders, marketing senders, newsletter senders, anybody sending any significant amount of email is in compliance with new requirements that Yahoo and Google published late in the year in 2023. Now, some of these requirements are specific to senders who send more than 5,000 email messages a day, but I wouldn't really look at that as a cutoff. For a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're a marketing sender or a newsletter sender, you're hoping to grow. And so certainly if you're not at 5,000 a day today, aspirationally, you're probably hoping to get to 5,000 a day at some point. So be ahead of the curve there and be prepared for all of these requirements. Second is that a lot of deliverability requirements end up being a moving target. Deliverability requirements are ever evolving. Just because they say 5,000 is the minimum send per day to have to qualify, to have to comply with these requirements, does not mean that couldn't change tomorrow. Like tomorrow could end up being 2,500 or it could end up being all messages. The point is, anyway, these were all best practices before they became requirements. So these are all things you want to do to be able to get mail delivered successfully. So there's going to be little harm as long as you're a good sender. None of these requirements are guaranteed to get to the inbox. What they do is they help mailbox providers better identify you as you and identify good senders to tell them apart from bad senders. So follow all this stuff, right? Don't try to use free mail or webmail addresses. Yeah. Keep spam complaints low, and don't do anything weird. Don't try to trick. Put check marks in the friendly from or imitate extra headers or stuff like that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that we've got one quick question that I wanted to surface to you, and another, just an aside, I think this is the start of Google and Yahoo really trying to crack down on spoofing in the ecosystem. And because in the past, I've seen Google inbox messages that were failing like every authentication protocol. And I think it was because their intelligence like told them better, but basically this is a crackdown on that. And I 100% agree. I think even if you're below that critical 5,000 threshold, even if you don't think you'll grow to that 5,000 threshold, I think you're going to see that without proper authentication, the filters are probably going to start biasing against sends that are not properly authenticated. And the other thing is, you can absolutely get Google Postmaster Tools data below 5,000 a day, and there are requirements to get that, such as custom DKIM. Al, the quick question we had here, Magnus wanted to know the changes to DMARC being set up on the sending subdomain, or is putting it on the organizational domain enough?
So that's a question of alignment, and for DKIM, right? You talk about DKIM alignment, like exact DKIM alignment would mean that you have DKIM set up exactly matching to the subdomain level. All things being equal, that's probably best, because you are assigning a signature specifically to you. That's called first-party DKIM, where you have it where it doesn't necessarily match. If it matches only at the organizational level, like if I sign with DKIM signature.
This one's they're saying DMARC. Yeah, like I think you can just put. Personally, I like just putting DMARC on the org domain. I think that's what the design of DMARC kind of intended. You can put it on a subdomain for a particular platform, and but those would be edge cases. I think the traditional happy path is put DMARC on your org domain, and it's going to cover every possible subdomain.
You're absolutely right. The only times I would bother with DMARC for a subdomain is sometimes a provider, the various send platforms, marketing automations, marketing clouds, some of those will put one on your send domain by default, even if it's a subdomain. And that doesn't necessarily hurt. but it doesn't protect the rest of your domain. So if you do it at the org level, you only have to do it once. You can set up a policy that covers the whole org. You can even set in that top level policy the SP field that says what to do with the subdomains. It's subdomain policy. So definitely, yeah. Ignore anything crazy Amanda said about DKIM. DKIM gets trickier when you worry about organizational alignment. Best to make sure that we're going to talk more about what is alignment and the concept of SPF and DKIM and DMARC and why that's important and why exact alignment or exact matches between the domain and the signature are important.
Now,
the last thing I want to throw out there, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, I think for some of you out there, maybe that are doing marketing, you might only have control over your marketing subdomain. So setting up DMARC on your marketing subdomain is better than not having it at all, especially if that subdomain alone is sending more than 5,000 a day. So I think it's better than not doing anything, but I would certainly say in general, the happy path is put it on the org domain, which I think kind of necessarily centralizes control with IT, like a little bit. I think this kind of is pushing us towards IT is the, de facto, they get to give permission what systems send on behalf of the company's domain.
Absolutely. Now, the last thing I'll say about this slide is you'll see these are a mix of things that the marketer or list owner is responsible for, and things that potentially the platform or email service is responsible for. Think of like headers, TLS encryption, list unsub posts that you one-click unsubscribe. And by new, I mean it's been around for more than 15 years, but now it's a requirement. So a lot of this stuff, again, it's going to be a mix. Like your send platform is certainly, if they're on top of things, they're going to add in all the necessary new headers and make sure there's compliance. But you also have to make sure, like some of these are going to be on you. Make sure you're sending wanted mail because complaint rates matter, right? Like LB said, Gmail was practically reticent to block mail in years past. They are no longer scared of blocking mail. They will block bad guys.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the basics of authentication. That's SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. We're really going to focus more on DKIM and DMARC. And, SPF is a simple authentication. It's just a text record DNS that contains the IP addresses that can send mail for you. A lot of times, email sending platforms and services set this for you. In this new world order, at least this version of the new world order, you often don't have to set that. When your email send platform takes care of it for you. Something to look up and check. For example, here at Aweber, we have a help guide that explains, no, you don't need to set up SPF to comply with this. We do that automatically. It's part of our automatically configured return path or envelope sender domain. The important bit here is domain keys identified mail. That's the cryptographic signature that is stuffed into a hidden header in a message to say that the owner of this domain or the signature domain authorized message. That's really what we're going to talk about here, because DMARC, what is DMARC? DMARC is a domain level policy that tells the world what to do when mail doesn't authenticate or fails authentication with either DKIM or SPF. So really the exercise here, to be able to implement DMARC safely, you need to implement DKIM properly before you do that. And if you don't, that's where the risks for DMARC come into play, that you can literally configure your DMARC record to tell the world to reject your legitimate mail if you haven't set up that DKIM authentication ahead of time. So that's why, that's really where DKIM and DMARC are connected at the hip.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure you've got some horror stories, as do I. I had, unfortunately, a sender once. Got a good question here from Sasha, who's asking, is Gmail going to require that the DMARC policy be quarantine or reject, or is a none policy adequate? I believe none policy is perfectly adequate. But if you ever want to move on, while you've got a stable DMARC implementation, might as well move on to BIMI, right? Which BIMI would require quarantine and reject in addition to a few other things. And honestly, I'll say I'm not the biggest fan of the quarantine policy. I think it's worse for business to business senders than it is for business to consumer, because I think business to business senders often
it's more relevant that the spam filter is going to have a quarantine folder that the recipients, individuals, don't have access to. So if you have your DMARC set to a quarantine policy, you send a message, you get a 250 OK, successful delivery response, and the recipient never gets the message to their mailbox. And not in the spam, not in anywhere. And I think that just leads to a really confusing, like, no information, what happened loop. Whereas I think with reject, it's going to be pretty obvious. You're going to get a bounce back in most cases. And personally, I'd rather have the information than no information. Not to say there is no use for quarantine, but I think for the majority of senders, unless you have a very large, very complex sending operation, I think there's not really a strong use case for the quarantine policy. I would just go none for a while, make sure everything's buttoned down, and then I'd skip over to reject. But I've definitely seen some instances where, like, IT rolled out DMARC with a reject policy. Marketing had to scramble to get things authenticated, so they had, like, contacted me, and then unfortunately, about a couple of weeks later, they were all good. They contacted me again because accounting had an issue where a bunch of people didn't pay their bill that month because accounting was using NetSuite and it was not set to authentic. It was not using custom DKIM signing to or a custom return path to pass the, on either DKIM or SBF. And a bunch of the messages bounced because they were sending to corporate clients with, fairly strict interpretations of DMARC. So it rejected the traffic. And so really, doing DMARC poorly can certainly cause some impacts there.
Exactly. And I have my own story about why I think quarantine is suboptimal. I'm going to say that for the policy slide so we can have
All right.
two different reasons why it sucks.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
There's a ton of tools to look up what's out there in DNS, and many of them are good. Most of them are good. I think don't be afraid to use your different tools like DMARC and all the other ones for, like, look up your DMARC record, stuff like that. Wombat Mail is my own thing that I've had for a long time. The output is just simple little blobs of text that'll do the DNS lookups for you, so you can check for an SPF record if you're looking it up. For example, there's examples you could copy and paste from when we share the doc out afterwards and see. What's interesting to me here is, like, DKIM, looking up for presence of DKIM when you're looking up to try to see if you've configured it right. You can't usually do that very well in DNS alone. You actually have to look at a message and see, does the message have the signature applied? Was everything configured properly along the way? But what you can do sometimes is look up to see, will I find the public key selector in DNS? Did I at least do the DNS bits for it right? And this tool will help you guess that. It does a bunch of different tests, a bunch of possible selectors to help you find that. DMARC is definitely the one where there's a billion lookup tools. DMARC's got a great one. Like I said, a whole bunch of other people have tools that can help you look it up. And the one thing that you do with all of these to create them is just copying and pasting a bit of text into DNS. It might also, for some of these, like DKIM, some places use a CNAME record, like which is an alias, a link in DNS, where you'll get instructions from them on how to do that. We'll show you that in a little bit, right? It's all about really little bits of stuff in DNS. So that's all of this compliance stuff really boils down to copying little bits of stuff into DNS and then using the various tools to make sure you did it correctly.
Absolutely.
So here's an example of that at my new home at Aweber, right? Here's how Aweber has you configure DKIM authentication. They give you 3 CNAME records and ask you to copy those into DNS. They've also got a domain connect feature for GoDaddy and a couple other registrars where you can make it a little more push button than this, but I use hover.com, which doesn't have that. So all I did is I literally just copy the name and the value and go back over to Hover and go into my domain and say, copy the name into the hostname field and copy the value into the target name or value field. And that sets up my 3 CNAMEs with the Aweber public keys. That's what we're linking to here. Put them into DNS. And that is all I had to do to configure to configure DKIM for my domain to be able to send mail from my ESP platform, which is Aweber. So it's not hard. Don't be freaked out. You don't necessarily have to be super technical. You just have to be detail oriented to copy and paste the right thing into the right field.
Yeah, and I definitely oh gosh, I'm trying to remember there's like a tool I like that what whatsmydns.net is a really good little tool that I like to use to check propagation. I'll throw that in the chat here. Yeah, oh, I only sent that to the hosts and panelists. Let me do that one more differently. Here we go, everyone. So this is nice because, and also I really love that y'all do the DKIM CNAMEs because that allows for the rotation of keys, which is really critical without your clients having to change any DNS records. And the rotation of keys, this is some deep cryptographic nerd stuff. It's in case any of the encryption algorithms or keys ever get like the private key, because you use public private key encryption. What you deploy to the DNS is effectively the public key. The private key lives at the mail server that is stamping the DMARC signing domain in there. If the private key ever gets popped, then basically that's not valid anymore, or you can't, it's crackable, it's cracked now, and you would want to rotate that key without all of your customers at your ESP having to switch it out. And just one thing I want to say is Al's 1000% right. DNS work is honestly how I got started in the industry. It's not the most difficult except for SPF. SPF is probably the most complicated, I would say, to get right, because you have to squeeze everything into one record. But a lot of ESPs like Aweber make this a lot easier now by giving you a custom like return path domain or a custom, domain or checking SPF against their own domain. So I think that is incredibly helpful for a lot of people. But just be aware, if you're at a bigger organization or if you're a vendor working for a larger organization, you're probably going to need to submit these changes to IT. So like be prepared to give IT the DNS records, and really in that format that Al has there, like here's the value, or, here's the host name, here's what the value needs to be, and make sure you provide a use case. And I think, a lot of what we have in here will help you do that, as far as like, hey, Google's going to require this. If we want, our sends to go on through, it's going to be essential. Absolutely.
So how do you test all this stuff? Now, right before let's touch on that for a second, then we'll dive deeper into the DMARC bit of it, which is, I think, the meat in the burrito. This is a great way, this tool from Steve Atkins, the Word of the Wise, is a great way to test that you are in compliance with all the necessary authentication bits, that you're in compliance with the new Yahoo and Google requirements, and a whole bunch of other stuff, all the different header checks and encoding checks and all this different stuff to make sure that everything's configured correctly. The only downside at all is that the output of it can necessarily get a little bit technical. It'll give you a whole bunch of stuff, but it tries to summarize it with, it'll give you little badges when you pass the section. But the best part for this DMARC compliance for the Yahoo and Google stuff is he's got a specific section in there called good practice. And you'll get a little badge that tells you are in compliance with the new Yahoo and Google requirements. So this tool is cool. It's brand new. It's only released a couple of weeks ago. Steve Atkins has really helped the industry a lot by sharing this out.
No, I think this is absolutely fan. And honestly, it's super easy. It just works. They give you an email address on the page there. You send a message to it, and then it really quickly runs all these checks. The one thing I would just say is I've worked for a couple of ESP. I've worked for a few different ESPs, and I've worked with lots of others. Just be aware the test message functionality does not always operate like basically if you use the template test or the test your deployment, that may not process exactly identically. Like sometimes I've seen it doesn't apply link tracking. Well, the other thing I saw I actually had somebody using this the other day for, checking their compliance with the new changes. It looks like they had done test. Well, the unsubscribe link failed because it wasn't a valid contact. It was just a test contact. So I would say, really for the best results, you want to take this and mimic a live send as much as possible. So add this address in your, have like a test list, add this address in there, then target that list for a deployment and send it as if it's like a full send. And just send it instantly, even if it's just got one contact in it. And then make sure you are going to want to delete that contact, because I think it is pretty single use, or you'll end up overwriting
your test output that you get. But it's a page, it's a shareable link. So, you can do this test and then you can send the link to your boss and say, hey, check the good practice section. It says we're all good.
Yeah. So, LB, you want to kick off the world of DMARC?
Yes, let's get super nerdy here about it. So really there's, 3 different policies. DMARC as a whole is a policy. And I honestly think of it as it's an umbrella that covers your whole domain and protects it from spoofing. Because let me tell you, if spoofers can, they will. I think people don't realize the amount of just opportunistic spoof like flying around the globe of really these malicious actors just trying to spoof from whatever domain they can, and then they have feedback loops. So if they start getting traction, then they'll focus more concerted efforts on spoofing there. But I've actually seen a couple of instances where spoofers even targeted senders that were had a DMARC policy. They had it set to none, and then we had to escalate to reject. And these were even a couple of very large senders. So Al, I know you said you had a reason here why you didn't love quarantine, so I'd love to hear it.
So actually, a friend of mine in the marketing space reached out just last week or a few days ago and said, hey, I'm getting these replies to email that we didn't send. And I explained to her the history of Joe Jobs, right? Going back 25 years when poor Joe, whatever his name was, his domain name was spoofed in millions of spams, basically put him out of business, right? Because it filled his mailbox up with bounces and complaints, and people are mad at him, and it's basically a denial of service attack. DMARC has sort of helped mitigate that, right? It helps to prevent people phishing and spoofing with your domain name. It limits their success. Quarantine leaves that door open just a little bit more than it would otherwise. In other words, DMARC with reject is the best locked door for your domain, because in this case, where her new employer had their domain set to quarantine, and they were still getting a few of these complaints back or replies back to mail they didn't send. So what was happening is somebody's out there spoofing mail, sending as them. The mail, even with the quarantine set as the policy, the mail is landing in the spam folder, and people are going in there and digging it out and looking at it, which is great. That's what the spammers want. Some spammers are crazy, and they'll say, I'm happy to get my mail delivered to the spam folder. It means it's in there somewhere, and some of them will find it. I've literally had that conversation with spammers before. Some of them are just nuts. And so when you leave that door open a little bit and they can still get through, you can still end up with more people seeing spoofed mail from you. And so that's, for me, that was just another example of, long story short, yeah, I'm using a little bit of hyperbole, but basically quarantine sucks as a policy. Either like you say, it can end up in quarantine folders in a BEC protection server that the average Joe user can't get to, so you have no idea what happened to the mail. Or it does get through if it lands in the Gmail spam folder, and it's just going to confuse people. Either let it through because it's legit, or don't let it through when it's not legit.
I think the other thing too is reject makes you a very unattractive target for malicious actors, because they don't want to deal with the reject bounces coming back to them. Like, that's going to clog up their infrastructure. They're trying to be as cheap and efficient as possible. Like, they're trying to spend as little as possible sending with and or dealing email. So if they're getting a lot of bounces back, that is going to clog up their works and make you just way less attractive. So again, none, quarantine, reject. I mean, think of it this way. You don't have to outrun the bear. You don't have to outrun the hackers. You just have to outrun somebody else. You just need to be more of a porcupine than any other brand out there. I think this is the other thing that I think is super crucial, and I see, oh man, there's nothing that like makes me sad in my heart parts like seeing a domain with a quarantine policy or a reject policy and absolutely no RUA equals reporting address. Like, not even
even going into their own internal mailbox, which honestly, that's not a lot better unless you've got something to parse those reports. Going to go into that. We're going to show you some examples of what those DMARC reports look like. And yeah, I think this answers a question that we have from the audience here, from Sasha. Are they going to require, are they going to require policy, a none or reject policy? I don't think so. I think we already covered that. And let's see here. Let's see. So you have a question, and Sasha also has a question about Gmail. Will they require strict alignment for mail sent from Gmail with a quarantine policy on their own domain? But is strict alignment required for senders sending to no, the requirement isn't strict alignment for people sending to Gmail accounts. It's literally, I've seen people, they'll sign up with ESPs out there and they will try to send from their Gmail address because they don't have smaller senders. Maybe they don't have a corporate domain or something like that. To be really honest, Yahoo's already blocking this traffic. Like Yahoo, if you're sending from Gmail, Yahoo has already been blocking you. I mean, ESP that I've been helping get away from this model because it was causing a lot of traffic blocks. And basically what Google is saying is they're going to escalate their DMARC policy so that worldwide, other than just Yahoo, who is very aggressive with DMARC, is going to start probably quarantining, spam foldering, quarantining, or blocking that traffic as well.
Now, the last thing I will say about this slide, the asterisk there next to SPF. Now, like I said, for your ESP or newsletter platforms, you probably don't need to set SPF. If you're using Google, Gmail, Google Workspace, or if you're using Office 365, you probably do need to set up SPF, and it's worth Googling that for your SPF configuration for O365, SPF configuration for Gmail, because in that instance, a Gmail or any sort of corporate one-to-one mail sending platform is going to set the return path, the SPF domain, to your domain. So that's the one instance where you should look harder at setting up SPF. DKIM can still cover you if you don't have SPF, but belt and suspenders, the more you can authenticate, the better protect yourself. Occasionally DKIM breaks in transit, so if you've got SPF as a backup right now, that can help to make sure that important emails are not getting lost. So here is my goofball data where I take the top 10 million domains, really ranked by popularity, which is not really email popularity, but it's the best I can get at from public. And DMARC overall is growing, right? Even with that weird glitch there in the middle of the chart. I think that's because who constitutes the 10 million domains kind of shifts over time, and that's when I updated my list, and I think that set that back down. I think LB had a good point too. That's heading into the latter back in the back half of the year where we're really getting into Black Friday, Cyber Monday season. And so people who were less important have sort of fell away, right? And the retailers kind of come to the fore. And as you can see through the whole rest of the year, DMARC adoption has been growing. I'm super curious to see, is it going to go nuts this year? I kind of wonder. I think so, but how you can't really see the future. So I track this every month and keep an eye on Spam Resource. And I'd love to meet up and have this discussion in a year. And it's 2024 really the year for DMARC. So policy, right? We talked about why quarantine sucks. I'm being a little silly. There's reasons, right? But be careful here. As we talked about, LB had that great example. I think of it too, like companies who the HR department might be using Paylocity or ADP or one of those, and they're sending their own messages, and they're using your domain. Are they authenticating properly? And those are the gotchas with DMARC that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, and I would say it's been really interesting to me, especially with the rise. I've worked with lots of clients on Shopify and then Klaviyo, and then basically, I mean, if you add, it's easily, you add in something like Zendesk for support ticketing, you add in something like Gorgeous for customer satisfaction, and I think reviews. I'm trying to remember what the review product we use, but then and some delivery, Shiply notifications, recharge for subscriptions, whatever. It's really easy these days for a small to medium business to have, I would say 10 or more systems that are sending mail on behalf of their domain or a subdomain of their domain. Like, so definitely it can be, email's gotten quite complicated, I think, in the last few years. Like it's getting, it's getting complicated, but we're here to help you sort through that. Absolutely.
So let's talk about reporting now. Yahoo is strongly encouraging that you have a reporting address. And there is value in having a reporting address. And actually, as a bonus today, if you go on spamresource.com, I put together like a quick and dirty guide to DMARC with a focus on what you do with reporting. I think of it as okay, better, and best. Okay is you don't have a reporting address. You just set up a very generic policy with policy equals none, no reporting. That's good enough to pass any requirements. Better would be to have a reporting address. We'll talk about more about reporting addresses here in a second. So at least reports are going somewhere so that you can at least check the box to say, I'm doing what Yahoo wants as well. None of these really give you easy to digest insight, though, and that's where best might be to work with a DMARC tool or service to have them put all that stuff together. And we'll touch on why that is and why it sort of sucks to have to parse XML reports by hand and all that happy stuff. But anyway, back to reporting here, right? So there's RUA and RUF reporting. So these are all fields you set inside your DMARC record. You put mail to in there, make sure you don't forget that, right? And they all have to go to an address somewhere. RUA is the most common type of reporting. That is very commonly what you want to implement with DMARC. That's aggregate reporting. There are counts which you get back from various providers like mail.ru and Google and a few others that tell you success and failure rates for counts of messages that they see. There's also RUF, which is forensic reporting, which is kind of a privacy nightmare, and very few people send them. I wouldn't even bother, because especially if you are a nerd and you decide to build a tool to parse the stuff for you, don't bother, because you're going to get so few reports. One last gotcha with reporting is external authorization. Now, this is kind of a nerd thing. Like if I set up a DMARC record for spamresource.com and I want to capture reports, just put an address out there that says that I'm capturing reports to make Yahoo happy. That address has to be in spamresource.com. It can be DMARC at spamresource.com, Iverson at spamresource.com, whatever. It can't be Chicago at Gmail. It can't be Chicago at bob.com, whatever. It has to be in that domain. Unless the domain that you're sending it to is set up to have a special DNS record that sets external authorization for that domain. This is one of those complicated nerd things that you should Google if you want to learn more about it. The big DMARC providers, these services, the tools that manage this stuff for you, they've got it covered already. That's why you probably never heard about them before. And it's both kind of new to LB and me too, to look at it like, hey, we've both had these times where we set up DMARC reporting for a group of domains, and so we say centralize it to one domain, and reports aren't coming through. What's going on? That's what happened.
Which honestly makes sense. Honestly, to me, that makes sense, though, because if I were a malicious actor and I wanted to flood somebody's mailbox, could essentially, without external authorization, I could just put, like, I don't know, somebody I don't like Gmail in there, their like messages are going to start getting blown up, because I'll say, like, I've seen a sender with like 300 million messages across just a single parent domain over like 30 days. I've seen them have like 9, 10, 40,000 reports sometimes, because like Google in particular, I've seen send multiple per day. Like I've seen Google send multiple per day. Like ideally it's supposed to just roll up like once per day, but I think Google, they see so much traffic, they're like, that report, the mail system would choke on me trying to send a report that fat. Absolutely. So here I've got a little bit of an example, and this is kind of to explain why you don't necessarily want to just route these to your own mailbox. Like Al said, there's good, better, best. Good, just have your DMARC policy. Don't even have an RUA equals mail to, email address. Not a problem. And another note I think we didn't put is you can also, DMARC supports up to 2 RUA mail tos. You can put more, but you're not guaranteed
that they'll be supported. But you should get at least 2 in case maybe IT has a system and then also marketing wants to be able to see the information as well. So you actually can route it into 2 platforms, but just be aware that might not be the most efficient. You'll be paying for 2 platforms to report on it as well. But here, this is the top of one of the XML reports you get back from Google via email. We see that the org name is google.com. They're identifying they're the one that sent this report. They give the report an ID that I redacted part of. The date range there, you can see that those are Unix timestamps. So there variety of websites can reverse that for you. These 2 in particular are it shows that it starts on, I think, let me check there we go, November 4th at, midnight, and then ends at 11:20 through 11:59 at midnight. Those that start the begin and the end. And then also it shows what they saw as the policy. So I've got the domain redacted there because I don't want to share info, but we see this one has a quarantine policy on both the main domain and the subdomain. They've got the percent set to 100, which is the default if you just don't even have a percent PCT equals in there. And you can see that they've got policy set to quarantine. If you go into the next one, we see what a couple of the rows of data look like. And I think these are really interesting. The one on the left here shows, we see I redacted the IP because it's dedicated, but that's a SendGrid IP. And Google is saying, okay, from this IP, we saw 894 messages. The policy available is none. We saw DKIM passed, and we saw SPF passed. And then if you go further down in, it's showing what the header from was, which is again just the parent domain or the org domain. And then if you go to DKIM, it's going to say whether or not it passed the alignment there. And also it even shows you what that DKIM selector is. We see that S1 that we know goes with SendGrid, and then again, down here, the SPF results, I've redacted the custom domain, but it is on a SendGrid, it's on a subdomain. And we can see that passed as well. So that's how we can tell, basically, one of these needs to pass up here in the policy evaluation. The other one I think is super interesting because it's actually a forward. This 209.85 220.41 IP I see all the time. It's Google's internal forward IP. We see the count of messages here is just 1. And we're seeing that DKIM passed, but SPF failed, which is a great point to what Al said earlier about belt and suspenders as far as having options for both. And we can see with this forward here, the reason we can see it's a forward, if the domain for DKIM stayed the same under the auth results and it passed. But then SPF, we see an entirely different domain that I did redact a good part of, but definitely the sending domain's a .ai, and this is definitely not a .ai. And it said SPF passed, but it didn't pass the alignment check. So this one, because DKIM passed, that was enough for DMARC to pass. If you want to go on to the next one, we've got, a list of reporting tools here. Validity has it, Inbox Monster, Redshift, DMARC, Postmark, Easy DMARC, DMARC.fr, and then also there's a website now with a whole host of DMARC vendors out there.
Good stuff.
And next,
this is cool.
Yeah, I'm going to show, this is an example from the DMARC reporting tool, Everest, provided by Validity. This is from our own email industries domain. I've redacted a little bit of the info here. I can't give away all our secret sauce, but this is for numerous of our domains combined together. And you can see we're honestly a relatively small volume sender. So, right on 98% compliance is fine for us because that's really only a few unauthenticated messages there. And non-compliant means that authentication, the way Validity does it, compliant traffic means it's passing DMARC. Non-compliant means it's passing either SPF or DKIM, but it's failing DMARC. And unauthenticated means it's not passing any authentications at all. And that's often where your spoofing is going to live. And then if you want to go to the next,
screen, they also give you really good options for drilling down into it. I love this. Here I can see all of my mail sources for the last 30 days. So we can see mostly we've just 67% of our mail is correspondence traffic, like coming out of Google. And we have a little bit of like app notifications for our product coming out of Mandrill. And then I think these are the other ones as well, all coming out of MailChimp. So, and you can see, you can break it down by, you could click in the app itself and not this flat screenshot. You can click on the IP address, the SPF domain, the DKIM domain, even geolocation to see, like, just sort where these sends are coming from different ways, which I think is one of the benefits to IT for, having this. Go ahead if you want to move on to the next one there. This I had to export just because the screenshot would have been way too wide. This is, if you clicked on, when I clicked on that Google on the last slide to drill into that traffic, this is what I got. I did have to export it into a spreadsheet and kind of crunch out some of the white space here, but you can see all the different field values that you get. It tells you the date, it tells you how much email they saw, it tells you what IP it came from. The provider here tells who provided the report. And then, you can see the from domain as well as the policy domain. You can see the reverse DNS of the IP. I believe that's something that Validity pulls in for you. And then what I like that's really clear here is you can see, okay, SPF, is it aligned? And did it, did SPF pass and was it aligned? So you can see for the first three, they were unaligned. And you can see the domain does not match. And then the same, we see the same on the next here, that DKIM is actually failing for a couple. But I wanted to call out ARC, which ARC compliance is another requirement of Yahoo. That's more something your email platforms will need to worry about and not you as an individual sender. But ARC is authenticated received chain mail, and basically it's stepping in and saying that even though this failed DMARC, it failed DMARC, we know it's a forward. So that's why I wanted to show that as well, because ARC can step in and authenticate forwards, and your ESP is basically going to be required to have it. And then below that, we see some larger volumes, like on January 5th, we sent 187 mails from the Google IP ending in .41, which is their like internal Google to Google sending IP from what I've seen. And everything passed and aligned and it was all good. So if you want to, you can go to the, we can move on to the next one. I know we're clipping down on time here.
One thing I wanted to add here, just for the DMARC reporting tools, and there's a couple of different ways you can do this, right? You can, I have a weird shadow on my Zoom. There we go. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. There's tools that are really combined deliverability tools that do multiple things. Yes. Validity and Inbox Monster are two examples of that, where DMARC reporting and monitoring is just a component. They'll do a lot of other deliverability related stuff. Your needs might vary. Prices on this stuff varies a lot too. I personally have used Redshift and DMARC, and they're both great tools. The on DMARC thing from Redshift will actually tell you when it notices, like we looked at in that report that LB just showed us, the different sources. When Redshift's on DMARC sees a new source, it will actually email you and say, hey, you should come and look at, I've seen mail for your domain coming from MailChimp, Constant Contact, or Sender.net, or Google, and it helps you. Even if you forgot to tell it all the different places, it'll pick that stuff up. So all these different tools are worth checking out. And at dmarcvendors.com, a guy named Mark Alley put that together. It's a fantastic list. If you really want like an index of all the stuff related to potential DMARC tools and services, it's a great place to go. All right. You want to talk about email industries?
Yeah, I'll just say email industry, I already kind of covered it. Email industries, we are really deliverability and email infrastructure and technology consulting, as well as, we execution, really everything kind of email industries. We've got, we take a really data-driven approach that's very results oriented. We got cool t-shirts and really cool people, and I don't believe Al saying over there he's not as cool. Al's super cool. And Inbox Expo May 2024, we're still even soliciting speakers. So if you have something interesting to talk about,
in email, in the email ecosystem, come, apply to speak at our conference. If you want help brainstorming topics, hit me up on LinkedIn, or one of the various email geeks, or on the email geek Slack if you're over in there. Lots of cool stuff coming down the pipe from us.
Very cool. And then there's my blog at spamresource.com. My blog is old enough to drink. It's been doing it for this kind of thing for a while now. I don't have cool t-shirts. My idea of dressing up is to wear a Cocktail Twins t-shirt to host a webinar. Sorry. You hire me, you get me, unfortunately. So I've been doing the deliverability thing for a while. So I've got a blog with a lot of guides. I keep track of industry updates. Like, for example, is Cox.net, the cable provider, is getting out of the email business and just moving all of their consumer mailboxes over to Yahoo Mail. Tracking stuff like that I know is going to impact senders over time is one of the things I like to do with Spam Resource. I've got an email newsletter where I can proactively push that useful info out to you. Got Wombat Mail with a whole bunch of cool tools for DNS and data where you can dig through, who hosts what domain and look up, which of the top 10 million domains have their mail hosted by Proofpoint, stuff like that. So, like I said, it's just one guy. I update it when I can, but it's a lot of fun, and I hope everybody finds it useful.
I gotta say, whenever I bring on a new hire, or if I am like introducing somebody to the discipline of deliverability, spamresource.com is the first link I send them. I'm like, go in here. Because honestly, I think the history of email is so important, and understanding just kind of the ecosystem as a whole. So let's run through some of these questions. We've got 9 questions and 8 minutes. Let's see if we can do it. Are there any requirements or Sasha asks, are there any requirements or recommendations related to alignment between from headers and DMARC policy in the reply to address, or is it acceptable to send a properly authenticated mail with a completely separate domain used for the reply to address? I would say the answer is yes. I would say you're fine with that. But also I'm going to go, it depends, because that's the canonical answer to every deliverability question ever. Just because I have heard that some platforms will look at the reputation of the reply to domain in addition. Like, basically, I just think of it this way: the more domains you have in the print of the email, whether it's in the header, whether it's in the body, that's more for the spam filter to question. But as long as the reputation of the reply to domain is fine, you should be fine.
Yeah, I have seen Gmail get a little itchy when you try to do weird stuff, like incorporate email addresses in the friendly from when you're trying to rewrite them to deal with forwarding or DMARC, stuff like that. So don't do that. But I haven't seen any sort of broad thing that's a problem with reply to. In fact, we were just talking internally about when you notify somebody that you've got a new subscriber, wouldn't it be cool if you could hit reply and have a message go back to that subscriber if they want to initiate a conversation? So I just added that to my own Spam Resource notification tool so that I can test that. So I'm going to be testing that over the next few weeks, and I don't really anticipate any issues though.
Another anonymous question here: is the 5,000 message a day cliff based on monthly average, daily max, or others? I think the real answer is here, we don't entirely know yet. Like, we don't entirely know how Gmail is going to implement this. I would say the way it's worded is it's worded kind of as if you ever send 5,000 a day or more, you need to be compliant with this. So if you think you're close, I'd err on the side of compliance.
Agreed.
What else? Do we have to have the one click in the body of the message if it's already covered in the list unsubscribe header? The answer I'd heard on this one is no. That if you don't need to have it, the one click in the header is sufficient, is what I've been told.
Right, but keep in mind, this is where it gets into the nitty gritty of it. You have to offer some method to unsubscribe. But when you think of that, if you think of that question in the context of, can I link to a profile center instead of a one-click unsub? Yes, it's okay to link to an unsub landing page in the body that has more options than just unsubbing. So yeah, that's okay. You don't have to have a one-click there. And frankly, if you have a one-click in the body, you've got to have some bot protection anyway in that platform, because you're going to get false positive on stuff. Like the landing page ought to have either you enter your address, which kind of sucks because you got to manually type in an address, or have a capture or something. A lot of platforms will have invisible capture on that landing page to try to prevent you will get weird false positives. You're not going to get a million of them. I don't think it's really going to kill you, but you will do stuff where the CEO of Fortune 500 company doesn't get his email because he or his security script for his company unsubscribed him without him realizing. Yeah. So that's something to protect against.
Yeah. I definitely caught Microsoft spam filter. This was years ago. This was back in like 2018. I caught the Microsoft spam filter IPs, like one of the cloud EOP protection IPs, clicking the one-click unsubscribe link in the email and unsubscribing our client. Like, I was working for an ESP at the time and they were so frustrated. This kept happening. We have a really good question here from Ron that says, do most ESPs like Salesforce Marketing Cloud, which I think, Al, you can speak to very confidently, already support the list unsubscribe post in headers, or is this something we need to talk to them about implementing?
So Salesforce Marketing Cloud actually has two platforms. We've got Marketing Cloud and we've got Pardot, which they've called Marketing Engage. Yeah. I think they've renamed it. Pardot for sure supports that header. They had it first. I think it is also implemented in Marketing Cloud Core. I worked on it, but that was a number of years ago, and I've had a couple of drinks since then. So I don't entirely remember how it came out or what the current status is. I mean, some of this stuff literally, like, ask me about pre-headers. I was literally the project manager for Salesforce on implementing pre-headers in 2014, right? So some of this stuff, I don't know why I remember that, but what I think I think you're going to be fine. But Steve Atkins' tool that About My Email tool will tell you that is a perfect example. Load it into Marketing Cloud as an address, send a real send, not a test send to it, and it will generate a report, and it will specifically tell you if you're complying with one click. I think they do it. Where it gets tricky though with Marketing Cloud is a lot of people, for a lot of big companies, Marketing Cloud is not the database of record. And so you can get in this scenario where you can have unsubs out of sync, unsubs that happen in Marketing Cloud that don't get back to the master database. So if it could be you got to make sure that you have a way where you are periodically, manually, or automatically syncing unsubs between your database of record and Marketing Cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say that's definitely something we can help with, because I think one thing a lot of people don't realize is if you change platforms, you still need to relay unsubscribes from the old platform for at least like 60 days after the last day that you send. Like, you need to be able to still retrieve those unsubscribes and respect them for 60 days at least. Actually, Jorge here has a really good question at the About My email tool, and it says that it's lacking the in-body unsubscribe, and it's not true. You have one. I would say don't send it as a test send. I think the issue is if you send it as a test send, the link sometimes will not work, because I had the same issue with somebody else that was testing with this tool the other day. So you're going to need to get that About My email address and add it into your CRM or your list as an actual contact, and pull it into maybe its own segment, and then do a real live send that way. So clone a previously sent campaign, or clone a campaign you're about to send, and then swap out the list so you're just sending it to this one. And I know that's a lot to go through for testing, but Jorge, it's probably because the in-body unsubscribe link is probably not working, because that contact's not real, and that contact value is encoded in the URL, but it's not actually, it's going to a 404 or something, and that's why it's probably failing.
Now, there could be a bug, because it's so new, but you're probably right. Or, it could have, it could be biased toward English. If you're sending messages in another language and writing out the unsubscribe word in there. Could be. Never say never. There could be a bug or two that Steve would love to hear about and fix. But LB is absolutely right that test sends do mess that up very specifically.
And we are right on 1 o'clock. I'm going to answer one last question here that's just to clarify what one click exactly means for FIRDEVs, which, I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. If I click this link, I need to be able to unsubscribe with a single click.
So in that list unsubscribe header, this is what Google and other platforms like iCloud use to power their in-app unsubscribe. So like that unsubscribe that Google puts at the top is what is powered by the list dash unsubscribe header. And that's why it needs to be a one-click post so that, you know, basically they can click it and it'll go through. Because I actually saw an example recently where this client, Google is pulling in a HTTP link related to that was href tagged in the HTML to the word unsubscribe, but they actually had two. And the first one was a preference center, and Google was actually pulling that in. And if you clicked on it in the Google like unsubscribe button in app, it actually popped out and took you to the preference center page. So it needs to not do that. It needs to be able to, you click that unsubscribe button in Google's app and you are unsubscribed.
The one thing I would add, if you want to deep dive nerd talk about list unsub, I have an on-demand recorded webinar where I go into everything I can think of, crash course in list unsub. It's about 20 minutes long. You can find it on Spam Resource.
Heck yeah. Well, awesome, y'all. I think we're going to go ahead and close it down because I know people's lunch hour is probably ending. So fantastic. I am sorry we did not get to all the questions. I'm going to make sure we capture these, and then we answered, 10 of the 17 questions we got today. We're going to capture the rest, and we might have to do like a little follow-up here for some of these. But thank you all so much for joining, and happy emailing in the new year, everyone.